Hey everybody. So, soon after uploading my video on Dragon Age Veilguard where I addressed comments from current and previous Bioware developers insulting their fanbase, an indie developer tagged me in a video of his talking about some matters to do with the game, the industry in general, gamers, and the way that YouTubers cover these matters. He mentions how there are good examples of how to tackle these matters and bad ones, and mentions me as one of the latter because of potential bad intentions derived from how insults and tone can immediately make people not want to listen to me, which in his opinion ends up not leading to any productive solutions to the problems in the industry or to Bioware making better games in the future. He presented his point of view and perspective as a developer and as someone who understands David Gaider's position. Now I'd like to present my point of view and perspective as a gamer and most importantly as a paying customer in the current climate of this industry. The decay of customer and studio relations and the toxicity of video game discourse is a big topic I've been wanting to talk about for a while already, and this presented the perfect opportunity to at least tackle one part of it in response. And I also aim to defend myself a little bit here because while I am not offended at the video that he made, as he didn't really insult me or anything, I do still reject the notion that I am incapable of speaking from the heart without resorting to insults, or the notion that I engaged in vitriol towards David or the other developers. David and the other developers who engaged with him are the ones who initiated a hostile interaction with their own fanbase, not me. I was merely responding to their hateful and baseless claims. Actions simply have consequences. There is really no other way around this. When someone is attacking you, you have the right to defend yourself, and their comments were simply disgusting. If anyone wants to go look at other videos of mine, you will be able to see for yourselves that this isn't my content. I don't insult or throw hate around at anyone who hasn't warranted it, with malicious behavior or insults of their own. In fact, the video itself had a disclaimer telling people to go watch my first video on Veilguard for context, and in that first video, I do no such things towards the director or anyone else. If you as a viewer find it unproductive or mean or whatever that I do not treat activists with kids' gloves, the same kinds of activists who hate us all as gamers and who self-admittedly want to take over the industry and burn it to the ground, then that is your point of view, but it is not mine. They could give a fuck about us as gamers or even as people, and this includes you listening right now as well, whoever you are, whatever games you like playing, whatever views you have on the world, whatever your politics are, whatever your sexuality or your gender or your race, they don't give a fuck about you. If your immutable characteristics and politics do not align with theirs, you are something to be destroyed. If your immutable characteristics and politics do align with theirs, then you are a convenience to be used for them to attain more false credibility and reach their goals. So honestly, whatever road you take when criticizing them with whatever words you're using, you are almost always going to be taking a far higher road than theirs anyway. But more on this later. Now let's get to the actual points in the video so that we can actually start talking about the main point that I have to make here in regards to why is it that video game discourse online has become so acidic and why studio-customer relations have become so toxic. First and foremost though, I do not harbor any ill will towards this guy, nor do I make this with any bad intentions or hostility in mind. So don't throw any hate at this guy. He respectfully presented his perspective as a developer in this tumultuous industry, and as I said, I want to present mine as a gamer and as a customer.
For example, I saw one from, and I hope I get the name right, the Zimbro. It's a video called Breaking Down Dragon Age Veilguard, Devs Attacks and Excuses. And while watching it, I was constantly reminded by a lesson that I kind of managed to learn by setting fire to a 6 or 7 year long relationship. The Zimbro's passionate. I can tell he loves the games, and I can tell he loves the old Bioware, and I can tell that he gets what's happening. But to be honest, it's not looking like he's trying to help solve the problem and hopefully get better games made by the current and future Bioware team. It's looking more like he's lashing out and trying to hurt the current Bioware team for what's happening. My then soulmate used to say to me, hey, do you want to solve the problem, or do you want to win and be the one that's right? And by the end of that relationship, I think it ended up with do you want to fix this, or do you want to destroy the other person, right?
I know that the relationship thing is just sort of an analogy to get the point across in regards to how these matters are discussed. Do you want to be a voice of reason and moderation to help shape the industry, or do you want to be like a Godzilla and attack it? But I still hate the use of a relationship thing as an analogy because there is no relationship between big game studios and their fan bases anymore. When you're in a relationship, you have full access to your wife or your husband. You can actually talk to them. If they're willing to listen and work on the relationship with you, then progress will be made. But in the industry, you as a gamer, as a paying customer, have an incredibly limited reach when it comes to getting your feedback across to the developers. This isn't to say that some studios don't have good relationships with their fans and a willingness to listen. Some do, even if for nothing else, then at least because they depend on them to remain financially afloat. But in general, all that gamers really have in order to communicate to the developers in regards to what it is that they want and what it is that they don't want is that age-old expression, vote with your wallet. Over time, we have been more and more separated from the game studios and from the actual direction that the games industry is taking. We stopped being able to rely on gaming news media and outlets and their journalists to aptly criticize the studios and publishers who kept pushing for more and more monetization in our video games. We stopped being able to rely on these very same people to give proper criticism towards the quality of the video games in question. Because of this came the rise of channels such as Angry Joe, Jim Sterling, and so many others, even the Actman, who I criticized a couple of weeks ago. These channels started to become the voice of gamers, and they rose up in popularity because of not holding back on their criticism of predatory monetization, laziness in game development, and just overall bad games in a wide array of topics that the gaming journalists stopped addressing because they had to maintain positive relations with the gaming companies in order to be able to get invited to preview events and get given early access to their upcoming games in order to make their reviews, their guides, their walkthroughs, etc. ahead of everyone else. In other words, they needed them to stay in business. Gaming journalism has completely sunk because of this. They were no longer a reliable middleman between gamers and studios because they were too afraid, too cowardly, and too fake to actually be appropriately vocal about the shit that was intolerable. Now, it goes even beyond that. Now they work together with the publishers and the studios to bash us, to demonize us, and to push their agendas. They have sunk so incredibly low that they shouldn't even be called journalists anymore. Their credibility is completely shot, given the amount of time that they were caught lying and misrepresenting the actual truth of a story and giving high review scores to mediocre games. So that avenue of contact with the industry was completely lost to us. Furthermore, many of these aforementioned YouTube channels have also been lost to us because of, much like the gaming outlets, they grew too big and now they have to watch what they say, otherwise they too will be blacklisted and thus their bottom line will be impacted. They've become dependent on external sources of revenue and access. Even now, as we speak, Bioware blacklisted all the creators that criticized Veilguard in their previews from getting early review copies. So, some big creators out there who once served as the voices of gamers have now stopped being relied on for that as well, especially now with the culture war going on and infecting the medium. Many are too comfortable in their spot to make waves that could knock them down, lose access to sponsors, lose further access to companies and products, etc. So they defend this ideological takeover or they pretend like it doesn't exist, hence my criticism towards the Actman. And some others haven't even seen it. They haven't looked into these companies like Sweet Baby Inc. or DEI, what it represents, the drastic effects it had and keeps having on the film and TV show industry, the heavy political implications that become more and more overt with each year that passes, so on and so forth. So at the end of the day, over time, gamers have had less and less of a voice when it comes to actually meaningfully impacting the industry. They feel like they have no impact, and so it all came down to money, because money is the only language that these companies speak at the end of the day. Only by not buying someone's game could we effectively tell them that no, this is not what we want. And through that, even let other studios around see them as examples of what roads not to go down. So if a game of a certain genre failed or a game with certain ideas didn't work out, maybe it would serve as a warning to other studios in the industry, just like massive successes would serve as an inspiration of what to follow. But now, even that avenue is being compromised. Some companies already have so much money that their goals stop being monetary and start shifting towards political purposes and social engineering purposes. We're seeing gaming companies going fully down the road of ESG scores. They structure their companies, their goals and directions of their studios, and even the content within their very games with diversity, equity, and inclusion-driven bullshit. They cake their games with socio-political messaging. They build their very games with lists like this that delineate what kind of content and designs are appropriate to be put into the games and what isn't appropriate, what kinds of designs are allowed and what aren't, while also following unnatural diversity quotas that completely kill creative freedom. And then they use this corporate language and put it into everything else. They turn their studios, their offices, into holiday resorts with all manner of spaces and utilities. The only thing left in some of them is getting their workers to sleep at the office as well in order to increase their productivity or some shit. Then they fill these studios with programs and initiatives and groups and subgroups fully dedicated to this DEI shit while pushing the very core of what a AAA studio should focus on into last place, which is the art and the passion of making a good game. And then they do it all while also telling us that $60 wasn't enough for a game, and now $70 is also not enough for a game. The costs are going up and blah 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 blah. So now there's talk of a standard copy of a game being hiked up to $80 and beyond. And it's like, why? The quality isn't going up. Shit, the quality is going down, if anything. What's going up is the corporate side of these studios soaring high into the fucking clouds, wanting to look like Silicon Valley Google or some shit. The fuck should I pay more for my games to sustain this shit for? Nobody asked for it. But they needed to expand and make more games. Where are the fucking games then? They're still taking time to get made, they're still losing quality, size and depth, so where's the fucking money going to? All these years of buying Ubisoft games and putting up with expensive expansions and e-stores monetizing the hell out of additional outfits and shit for what? Where was the rise in quality of Ubisoft games? What the fuck did we pay all that money for? This right here is where all of that money went to. All of these groups and bureaus and shit dedicated to diversity, equity and inclusion within the very same company that do nothing to the actual quality of the games. More about this on these two videos right here, if you're interested. Notice how over the past few years, it has even become a dirty word to appeal to gamers, to be excited to show them a latest game, to have a pro-gamer messaging in their structure. Sony went from for the players to a cold fucking factory of exclusives, which they now are also fully investing into DEI for, not to mention their association with Sweet Baby Inc. in the last two major exclusives that they released, that we know about, by the way. So what the fuck can people do now when even voting with our wallets is not enough? We have no dialogue left with the studios, we have no leverage even with our wallets. Sure, we should still continue to not support shitty games, of course, but the impact it has been severely watered down because of ESG grants given to companies pushing hard on this DEI bullshit, and companies like BlackRock financially benefiting companies that push for this kind of stuff in order to enforce behaviors and negatively impacting companies that do not play their game.
You have to force behaviors, and at BlackRock we are forcing behaviors. You know, what we are doing internally is if you don't achieve these levels of impact, your compensation could be impacted, okay?
We're doing the same thing.
And so it's just, you have to force behaviors. And if you don't force behaviors, whether it's gender or race or just any way you want to say the composition of your team, you're going to be impacted.
This industry, and the same goes for film and TV, like for example with Disney, they have shown that they are more than willing to take a few losses in order to keep pushing for establishing themselves and this shitty content as the normal thing in these industries. They are like parasites. So even when we vote with our wallet and Suicide Squad flops and then Stellar Blade succeeds, when Concord and Dustborn flop and Black Myth Wukong breaks records, when Starfield's expansions can't even meet the same player numbers as the people playing Skyrim and Fallout 4 at the same time, 13 years and 9 years after launch respectively, when Veilguard's pre-order numbers and online discourse are a disgrace, while people return to play Origins instead. With all of this, even when with all of these clear messages that we as the gaming public send through voting with our wallets, telling people what we want and what we don't don't want. We still get corporate reports like the one from Sony going bigger on DEI. We still see Square Enix, despite dropping Sweet Baby Inc., still carrying on with their path of DEI. We still see Xbox dropping that list that I just showed of utter lunacy as a virtue signal of how amazing their video games are going to be in the future. We still see Ubisoft releasing one of their worst games to date and masking all of its criticism under misogyny. We still see CD Projekt Red saying that the remake is going to be for modern audiences. We see them hiring writers from Sweet Baby Inc. and putting them up as senior writers. We see them caking their websites with DEI bullshit. We see them doing a program that discriminates against men so that they can hire more women in the future, like so on, so forth. This is the reality that we are living through in this industry. We grab our wallets and we vote and we vote and we vote, but this shit just keeps on coming. There is a massive clash between paying customers and game studios. We have lost so much of our control over what gets made to an insane degree at this point. We are long past dumb little crap like, for example, not wanting sequels to games that didn't need them, or not wanting remasters to games that didn't need them. That's small stuff. We are now at a point where we're being excruciatingly clear of what it is that we want and what it is that we don't want, and the studios, the developers, the publishers, etc. are all telling us to fuck off and are deliberately making the shit that we already established that we don't want, and most importantly for them, that doesn't sell. And they mask it all under this pathetic narrative of this industry isn't only yours, the world has changed, which I believe is a direct term that David Gaider used himself, which is all complete garbage. Like, what are we doing all of this for? First of all, it's disingenuous as fuck because it presents a false narrative that the industry is this single linear line of products that have only ever appealed to one demographic, which is a total and complete fucking lie. It is a wide universe of different genres where wildly different people come to play games that they enjoy. What's happening right now is a false narrative that pretends as if the poor, marginalized minorities who apparently have never been able to enjoy mainstream games ever in their lives are now finally being seen and represented in this industry. When number one, this has never been about being seen and represented. We aren't all fucking narcissistic people who need to be seen and represented in order to enjoy a video game. We aren't all people who inject ourselves and our persons into the game to the point where we are literally unable to enjoy a story where we are playing as someone else. And number two, they have always had the opportunity to make games to pander to them before. In fact, many of them already exist that do in other genres and in admittedly far lower budgets, which makes sense, because if you're going to pander and make games for a minority, then you need to expect a far smaller fan base. You can't just go grab a video game that has the AAA budget and then try to apply it to this minority, otherwise you're fucked. You're not going to have enough money to pay for your game and make a profit. But they don't want this. This is not the goal that Sweet Baby Inc. and other similar cesspits of activists have in mind. It's not inclusion that they want, it's takeover. They explicitly say it themselves. So if anyone over here is being discriminated against and being pushed out, if anyone is having their content taken away from them, it's us. It's the wider gaming audience who is having to put up with immersive fantasy worlds being replaced with fucking current day San Francisco and good mature writing being replaced with socio-political commentary and storylines and plot twists and good characters being replaced with propaganda, while having to shut up about it or be branded bigots. This is all being done deliberately while insulting us for criticizing it, with this illusion of replacing us with a modern audience. How many games must fail until this bullshit stops? This modern audience wasn't enough to save Concord, they weren't enough to save Dustborn, they weren't enough to bring players back to Soy Squad after the last two brave and stunning lesbian characters of diverse backgrounds being introduced over the summer. They aren't enough to save Unknown 9, and in the case of Veilguard, even if the game manages to sell enough not to be a complete and utter disaster, it is only going to manage to do so because of the weight that the Dragon Age name still carries in a lot of us. Because if judged out of its own quality and merit alone, this game is fucking cooked. It is a fucking embarrassment of a fantasy setting and a shadow of what the Dragon Age franchise is. So let's get back on track for a bit. I'm sorry that this is very rambly. I promise that someday I'll work on a proper script for this topic. We have gamers that feel like nobody is listening to their criticisms, and when they do, they just get completely misrepresented and insulted, which is what David Gaider and his Power Rangers of mediocrity did to the Dragon Age fanbase. Gamers that feel that their last avenue of contact, which is to vote with their wallet, is being compromised. Studios that actively move away from catering to their audiences, developers who insult their fanbase and push real-life far-left political ideology into their video games, companies deliberately going out of their way to give people what they don't want in service of forcing behaviors with ESG and BlackRock money. Respectfully, I've gotta ask, how the fuck can anyone expect the discourse between gamers and studios to be nice and healthy at the face of all of this? How can people expect the average gamer who just got insulted by a developer to remain calm and respectful when they are sick of being disrespected and treated like shit, while also feeling powerless to do anything about it? Try to vote with your wallet, some fucking jackass named BlackRock will come in and balance it out with ESG grants and shit. Try to voice your criticism online, some fucking jackass from the studio or publisher tells you to fuck off, that you and other people who think like you are not needed and are racists and sexists and phobics and this and that and the other, and then deliberately keep making more of the slop that you just voice your criticism against. Hell, they even go as far as to humiliate their audiences. Like, we've got developers in studios now acting like retarded high school bullies and shit. Wow, dude. Why do you care so much about this? Wow, what an incel. Imagine caring that much about this. Wow, bro. What are you, some kind of like nerd or a coomer or something? Like, I'm sorry, but no. I say again respectfully because I don't want to come across as hostile to the person who made that video, but no. This is simply incompatible here. If this was a relationship and your wife or your husband treated you the way that these fucking studios, developers and executives treat gamers, you would get them out of your life in 2 seconds. There is an inherent hostility between gamers and studios right now, and it's not going to go anywhere for as long as these studios keep hiring activists and unhinged morons who cannot separate their jobs from their socio-political beliefs, and who are so deep inside of a malicious bubble that they see the average fucking guy named Tony, who enjoys playing Dragon Age and Mass Effect, as a fucking enemy that must be defeated. What's your sexuality, Tony? Heterosexual? Disgusting. Why aren't your pronouns in your bio, Tony? What are pronouns? Fuck you, Tony. You can't have your game series as it was. The world has changed. You're not welcome anymore. The studios can't just be studios anymore. They now have to be politically driven institutions that use their intellectual properties to indoctrinate morons into their side. They have to use video games as a vehicle to push their ideologies. How do you think the masses of Tonys all over the world are going to respond with treatment like this while their favorite franchises burn to the ground in favor of an ideology that has no place in gaming? Even the female Tonys are getting told to fuck off because they don't fit the right mold anymore either. In my comments, I even get gay and lesbian Tonys. I've even gotten transsexual and non-binary Tonys who don't like this bullshit that's happening to their entertainment mediums.
What's your name? Tony! Fuck you, Tony!
The Tonys of this world are getting pissed off, and it's only natural that their response will be answered in kind with the climate that has been set by these studios, developers, directors, actors, executives, etc. Don't pin the blame on us. Also, in his video, he said this in defense of David Gaider's comments.
And I'm looking at the attacks that David Gaider's getting from left and right, from the left and from the right. And for doing what? Doing his best to support the people that A, inherited his work of many decades, B, are his colleagues in the industry that he helped shape. An industry that's been going through some really heavy shit. And C, he's watching the work he put his heart and soul into, right? The work that shaped many books and many writing and design careers. Because his work is not just Dragon Age and Neverwinter Nights. It's the result of everybody that's been impacted by this. And he has to look at it being altered and changed and modified and probably disrespected, and he can't do nothing about it. Nor should he. because of the lesson we learn through our first decade in the industry, if we survive that long in there, is that you can't be married to your ideas.
There is no universe in my mind whatsoever where it is justifiable to insult your fanbase the way that he just did. Especially considering the fact that he had his own complaints about the game. Of course, he used very flowery words to put it as softly as he could, but he had criticisms of the game, of the design, of the characters, of the gameplay aspects, of the fact that choices didn't matter. He had these complaints. He put them down in his own way, but he put them down. But then he sees fans having their own criticisms, their own things to say, and he fucking insults them. That is no way at all to defend his colleagues and defend the brand that he helped build. In fact, that is the complete opposite of what he should do if he wants to protect the Dragon Age brand. He went on an unhinged attack at the fanbase that had been criticizing the fucking game, same as he did. How are people supposed to respond to such a disgusting display of hostility from the developer? Nothing justifies hating on the fanbase that loved their games and kept them alive for as long as they did. David did not have any excuse for his words whatsoever. There is no reason for it. I have seen drastic change hit studios before, and I have seen what respectful developers do at the face of it. I'm going to keep this as short as possible, even though it's actually a pretty long and detailed story, but we're going to use Don't Nod as an example. Don't Nod created their baby, Life is Strange, back in 2015. Then, when it became a success, Square Enix wanted that baby milked for all it had. But Don't Nod did not want to do this. They wanted their characters to move on. Long story short, Don't Nod had to watch Square Enix hand the license of Life is Strange to some random, unexperienced team who had spent the previous decade making ports for PSP games. This new team, now rebranded into Deck 9, had brought back their characters to make fan service games of poor quality that completely skewered those characters' personalities, their personal stories, relationships, etc. This went on to even alter the very essence of the fandom of Life is Strange. I was a very active member of that community while it was growing. While being very youthful, very pro-LGBT, very active in ship wars and Tumblr stuff and whatnot, it was also very passionate and intelligent, and would often break out into writing full fucking essays focused on breaking down the characters and writing creative theories and fanfictions that played with the time-traveling concept that the first game had. After Deck 9 took over, the vibe completely changed. The game's focus on fan service made it a fandom more concerned with shipping and immaturity than any discussions or theories or character breakdowns. At some point, during the wait between episode 2 and 3 of Deck 9's Before the Storm game, the prominent posts on the community were about how the developers better put in a sex scene between the protagonists in the finale, Chloe and Rachel, who, since the game was a fucking prequel, were actually minors. Another example of this was when this prequel fanservice game came out, people piled together to attack Don't Nod's developers and Don't Nod's defenders because of how they denied to give them the fanservice game that they wanted. And now Deck 9 existed, so fuck it, Don't Nod was no longer needed. On top of that, when Don't Nod finally released their second and final Life is Strange game, which was set in a totally new place, with totally new characters and new themes, they were relentlessly attacked again because the protagonists were now two boys. And since in episode 1 we could see some text messages where the protagonist admitted that he had a crush on a girl, some members of the LGBTQ+ and their allies within the group even did some cringe posts about disowning Don't Nod, since they weren't doing lesbian protagonists anymore. Which was actually hilarious because much like the first game, which had an option between romancing a male character or a female character, the second game had the exact same thing, just that they didn't fucking see it because they were too busy trying to cancel the studio for not putting hot gay action in the first fucking episode of the game. This is the hatred that the developers of Don't Nod had to endure, and believe me, they saw it all. They were actually in several fan communities and they had full access to all of this backlash. This is the shit that the director of the Life is Strange game, Michelle Koch, I don't know if I pronounced that right. If there's something that you guys know about me on this channel, it's that I can't with fucking French names. Anyway, this is what he had to see happen to his quote-unquote baby. And despite all of this hatred from such a sizable chunk of the community, despite all of this toxicity and actual vitriol, the developers from Don't Nod never said a peep. not a single word towards this toxic side of the fanbase, and they still protected and defended their colleagues at Deck 9. They still endorsed their games publicly. Even to this day, even with Deck 9's Life is Strange double exposure game, which just came out and is getting blasted online because of ruining 2 original characters purposefully, the director of the very first Life is Strange game still comes out to protect the developers and urge people to not be negative, fully knowing that he has nothing to do with it anymore, fully knowing that he will never be able to touch his own Life is Strange franchise ever again, and fully knowing that it's getting rammed into the ground by Square Enix's and Deck 9's incompetence and greed. This is professionalism. This is respectable. What David Gaider did is the complete opposite of this. And now, in conclusion, the only last thing that I want to say in closing is that criticism doesn't always have to be sugar-coated. In fact, it simply cannot be sugar-coated. This is an industry that has always taken advantage of people's ambivalence and tolerance. You give them an inch, they take a mile. It happened with the rise of predatory monetization, and it happened with the rise of diversity, equity, and inclusion. If people are not vocal in their criticism when their games are truly bad, then the problems are only going to continue to grow and become worse, be them of a nature of monetization, or a nature of DEI injections, or a nature of laziness. No matter what it is, people have to speak up. I will never advocate for harassment or anything like that. What I am referring to is harsh criticism, not being afraid to say what you truly mean, not being afraid to call something shit, not being afraid to vocalize how stunned you are at a studio's incompetence or out of touch antics. We're never going to go anywhere if we just soften every word and forgive every blunder, just because developers are people too. In his video, he says that developers must learn very early on to not be married to their work. Then they should also learn not to take criticism of their work as personal attacks on their life as well. So many studios nowadays foster a culture of toxic positivity. This stuff makes them be unable to listen to criticism of any kind. This kind of environment fosters mediocrity, and then the mediocrity comes out, the gamers fucking play it, they see it, they're like, what the fuck is this shit? And then the developers are all shocked, like, oh my god, I can't believe we're being attacked like this. Like, what the fuck are you doing? Look at the release date of I already forgot the name of the fucking game. I can't believe this shit. The fucking Star Wars Outlaws. Look at the state of release of Star Wars Outlaws. Look how broken it was. Like, how do you think that people should react to something as bad as that? At some point, it's just not enough to be like, this video game did not suit my expectations. At some point, it's like, yo, Ubisoft, what the fuck is this shit pile that you released? The stakes are simply way too high. We're talking about $100 million projects. If anything, these developers should be thanking everyone who tells it like it is, instead of those who blindly praise their slop so that they can maintain business relationships with them. Because the best way to keep their jobs safe is to have brutal criticism, showing them where they went wrong and what are the things that they must do in order to ensure that their future games are successful. And of course, showering them with love whenever they succeed. I mean, this is the thing that everybody always fucking forgets and pretends that doesn't exist. The amount of love that gamers are able to put out there for the games that they actually enjoy. We go to the lengths of defending them against hatred attacks from gaming journalists like fucking Kotaku and IGN and etc. But anyway, that's pretty much all that I had on this topic for now. As I said before, I intend on diving into this in a more proper manner that is not attached to Dragon Age Veilguard or David Gaider, and also that isn't being recorded at 3 AM while I low-key whisper into the microphone. But for now, the response from this indie developer provided an opportunity to answer some important questions, defend myself in regards to my tone in that video, and talk a little bit about the fact that fanbases are running out of avenues to communicate healthily with studios, and sometimes, even when they do, they still get insulted. There is a big shift in the industry. It's a lot like what happened at Disney and this anti-marketing bullshit that they pulled, trying to offend their own fan bases to push them out and then pander to a modern audience in order to replace them with. We're not playing on a leveled field. While I make it a point to separate myself from channels like Candy Pants, and while I constantly separate myself from homophobia and transphobia as well, and as much as I encourage moderation and reason when tackling these matters, this does not mean in any way, shape or form that I'm going to be treating these matters with kids clubs either. I'm not interested in that whatsoever. That does nothing. These people are ruthless. They don't give a fuck about us, and they are in the wrong. They're in the wrong because they've got no right to pump their ideological shit into everyone's entertainment mediums. And they are in the wrong because when they do, these fucking projects lose their quality and their value. They break immersion, they water down characters and storylines, and result in weak games and TV shows at best and complete fucking failures at worst. So I have no interest in holding back and letting them keep gaining more ground in order to continue to fuck up this industry. Want to see it get better? Join the discussion. Be reasonable and moderate, as in don't be an extremist, but don't be soft and overly tolerant either, because they take advantage of that shit. They will flip it on you. They will make you feel guilty as if you did something wrong or advocated for shit that you never said. Just like David Gaider trying to paint the entire side of the fanbase that dared to voice their criticism into racist incels. Be reasonable, be open to listening to the other side, but be strong and be firm in the shit that you know to be the truth. Thank you very much for watching. Please like the video if you enjoyed it. All these Veilguard memes are making me curious about the train wreck. I might actually just grab it used as soon as possible, or maybe use the EA Play to access it in order to make a review of my own, potentially calling out and debunking all of these glowing 9s and 10s and shit that the official gaming outlets are giving it, while also maybe trying my hand at some humorous content with clips of dogshit writing, hilariously shameless injections of socio-political messaging and propaganda. So yeah, I don't know, make sure to subscribe to not miss out on any of that stuff, and I'll see you guys sooner or later. And sorry about the whispery voice of this video.